Their mercy was an ultimatum. Ours is a mirror. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the Terran Federation carrier Balance, her form, a still shadow against the swirling starscape of the main view screen. Before her, the Viridian system hung like a jewel on black velvet, a prize held hostage. At the heart of that system, a countdown timer ticked down with chilling precision, superimposed over every channel, SOAD 4716. The numbers were crimson, a digital bleed staining the darkness. This was the signature of the Valdani Ascendancy conquest by the clock. Status, Kalin. Rostova's voice was low, cutting through the quiet hum of the bridge. The air tasted of clean, recycled oxygen and the faint, sharp scent of ozone from the nearby tactical console. Tactical Officer Kalin, his fingers a blur across his holographic display, did not look up. No change, Admiral. The Valdani fleet holds its blockade pattern around Viridian Prime. 32 combat signatures centered on the Overlord's dreadnought, the unassailable will. The civilian convoy is still corralled in the outer system running on fumes. The consul cast a cold blue light on his focused expression. Rostova's gaze drifted to a secondary screen showing the 80,000 souls in that convoy. They were refugees from a collapsed neighboring system, and they had arrived at Viridian seeking sanctuary only to find a cage. Now they were a bargaining chip, their lives the weight on the Valdani scale of submission. Solon, the fleet mind of the Balance, manifested as a simple pulsating sphere of light beside her command chair. Its voice was serene, a calm ocean of logic. Admiral, the Valdani Overlord sends a general broadcast. He reiterates his terms. Viridian will swear fealty to the Ascendancy or its people, and the refugees will be rendered unto dust. The ultimatum is final. They called it strength through submission. Rostova nodded slowly, her knuckles white where she gripped the chair's armrest. Her reflection stared back from the polished deck, plating a woman caught between a hard choice and an impossible one. The Valdani doctrine was a blunt instrument, effective because it offered no nuance, no room for negotiation. It was a fire that consumed everything in its path, leaving only ash or vassalage. They believe this simplifies the equation. Rostova murmured more to herself than her crew. Submit or die. They think it's a show of strength. A young ensign at the communications station swallowed hard, her anxiety a palpable thing in the controlled quiet of the bridge. She sat in a small cabin aboard the refugee vessel Stargazer's Hope, reading a story to her younger brother. The ship's lights flickered, and the recycled air was thin. And then the brave knight flew in on a ship of pure light. She read her voice barely a whisper, trying to drown out the low thrum of the failing life support system. Her brother, small and frail, looked up with wide eyes. "Are the lightships here now, Ilara?" he asked. She pulled him closer, the flimsy data pad shaking in her hand. "Soon," she lied, offering a smile she did not feel. "They're coming soon." Back on the Balance, the tactical challenge was stark. The Valdani had sown a dense field of kinetic mines around the direct vector to Viridian Prime, forcing any rescue attempt into a handful of monitored kill zones. Solon's light pulsed, presenting a series of attack scenarios on Rostova's private display. Each one was a brutal calculation of accepted losses. Solon's primary recommendation is a focused kinetic strike against Sector Gamma 7, Kalin reported, interpreting the data flow. It projects a 78% chance of creating a breach wide enough for the convoy. It also projects a 34% loss rate for the convoy vessels during the transit. A 1 in 3 chance of being torn apart by shrapnel, Rostova stated, her voice flat. "We don't deal in those numbers. Find another way. Brace for the hard choice." "Admiral," Solon's calm voice cut in. "The calculus is clear. A direct confrontation minimizes risk to Federation assets while maximizing the probability of saving the majority. Sacrificing a part to save the whole is the most logical course. Rostova turned her head slightly, her gaze fixed on the AI's glowing form. You're a brilliant mind, Solon, but you were coded to calculate, not to comprehend. We don't trade lives, not one. She straightened, her voice ringing with newfound command. We make a third option. The bridge crew felt the shift in atmosphere. The quiet tension solidified into focused resolve. Rostova's orders came in a steady, measured cadence, each one building on the last. She was no longer just observing. She was conducting. Kalen, I want our EW suite at full power. I don't want to hide from their sensors. I want to drown them. Chief Sharma, she said, addressing the engineering lead over the comms, prepare to deploy the full complement of the Looking Glass drone swarm. A murmur went through the bridge. The Looking Glass was not a weapon. It was a massive cloud of programmable microsatellites, each one a sophisticated mirror capable of absorbing, amplifying, and redirecting sensor energy. It was a tool of profound deception. A mystery is a weapon in waiting. So long. Rostova continued, her eyes gleaming with a strategic fire. Plot a course for the convoy. A wide, unconventional approach using the gravitational pull of Viridian's gas giant Cygnus. Keep it low energy, minimal drive signature. Kalen's brow furrowed. Admiral, that route is twice as long. The convoy's life support won't hold. The ultimatum clock. The clock is part of their weapon system, Kalen, she countered smoothly. It's designed to force us into a panicked direct assault. We will not play their game. We will play ours. She paused, letting her words sink in. Their doctrine is built on the certainty of a binary choice. We're going to give them 1,000. The Balance and its 2 escort frigates began to move not towards the planet, but parallel to the blockade line. They began emitting a tremendous amount of electronic noise, a chaotic symphony of ghost signatures and false sensor readings. Then the Looking Glass drones were released. They bloomed from the fleet's deployment bays like metallic seeds spreading out to form a shimmering, kilometers-wide nebula of reflective surfaces. Their sensors were drowning in lies. On the bridge of the unassailable will, the Valdani overlord watched his tactical display corrupt into a blizzard of false information. Thousands of new contacts appeared, vanished, and reappeared. Some were the size of frigates, others as large as carriers. His sensor officers were screaming about signal saturation. Report! The overlord bellowed, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the deck plates. Lord, it's the humans, a frantic technician cried out. They've created a sensor ghost fleet. We cannot distinguish real targets from the noise. The system is reflecting our own sensor pulses back at us as hostile signatures. The overlord sneered, a predator seeing what he believed was a prey animal's desperate trick. A coward's tactic. They hide in a hall of mirrors. Order the fleet to fire on the largest signatures. If they want to hide in the chaff, they will die with the chaff. Lances of plasma and kinetic rounds began to tear through the shimmering cloud. Explosions blossomed in the void, but they were empty, destroying nothing but disposable drones. The console on the Balance showed the Valdani wasting enormous amounts of energy and munitions on phantoms. The heat bleed from their weapons was a beacon in the cold dark. Hold the line. Teach the lesson. Under the cover of this grand deception, the real convoy, shielded by a small contingent of human corvettes, began its slow, silent journey along the path Solon had plotted. Their drives were barely active, letting the gravity of the gas giant Cygnus do most of the work. It was a delicate, nerve-wracking maneuver. A single miscalculation, a single Valdani patrol stumbling upon them, would mean annihilation. Convoy is passing the halfway point of the gravity slingshot, Kalen announced, his voice tight. Life support is critical in 6 of the vessels. They're sharing power, but it's not a permanent solution. They just need to hold on a little longer, Rostova said, her gaze unwavering. The main screen showed the Valdani fleet still engrossed in its futile bombardment of the mirror cloud. They were so focused on the illusion that they had failed to notice the truth sneaking around their flank. This was the first part of the lesson. Ultimatums rely on a focused, singular threat. By diffusing that threat into 1,000 points of confusion, the ultimatum's power began to fray. The Valdani doctrine had no answer for an enemy who refused to stand still and be counted. A new pattern in their firing solution, Admiral, Kalen warned, his tone sharpening. A sudden escalation. The Overlord is getting frustrated. He's ordering his ships to saturate the entire area with proximity-fused warheads. He's switching from targeted fire to indiscriminate destruction. Their brutality was their only tool. The space within the looking-glass cloud began to erupt in a rolling wave of explosions. The Valdani were no longer even trying to aim. They were simply trying to break the toy they couldn't understand. The cost in energy was staggering, a testament to their fury. On the Balance's bridge, the low hum of the ship's systems was punctuated by the distant, silent flashes. Rostova's jaw tightened. Solon, how long until the convoy is clear of the blockade line? 17 minutes, Admiral, the AI replied. However, the shock waves from the Valdani saturation bombing will reach their current position in 12. The unshielded civilian hulls will not withstand the impacts. The bridge fell silent. The third option had just hit its first major complication. The Valdani's brute force approach was threatening to undo Rostova's elegant strategy. The choice was back on her: risk the fleet to shield the convoy, or watch them be destroyed by ripples from a battle they weren't even in. We can't move to intercept, Kalen said, his voice grim. It would expose our position and the convoys. We'd be giving them a real target. We won't, Rostova said, a new idea taking shape. We'll give them a better one. She turned to her communications officer. Patch me through to the Overlord. I want to have a word with him. A direct hail was a risk. It would confirm her command presence and focus the Overlord's rage directly on her ship. But it would also be an irresistible piece of bait. The comms officer looked at her stunned, but a sharp nod from the Admiral sent her scrambling to comply. Admiral, this is an unnecessary risk, Solon cautioned. Revealing your position serves no logical purpose. The purpose, Solon, Rostova said, her eyes fixed on the main screen where the Valdani dreadnought's icon pulsed, is to remind him that this is a conflict between commanders, not a slaughter of innocents. The account must be settled between equals. The channel opened. The face of the Valdani Overlord appeared on the main screen. He was a creature of harsh angles and arrogant certainty, his face a mask of contemptuous power. He sat on a throne-like command chair, surrounded by the stark, brutalist architecture of his ship. The human coward reveals herself. The Overlord rasped, his voice like grinding stone. Have you come to beg for the lives of your pets? I am Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Federation. She replied, her voice calm and clear, a river flowing against his rock. I am here to offer you a choice. Cease your indiscriminate fire, and you may yet retain some measure of dignity. Continue, and you will learn the true cost of wasting your strength on shadows. The Overlord laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You threaten me from within your cloud of tricks. Your fleet is a phantom. Your conviction is a lie. Your time is up. He gestured to an aide off-screen. Target the source of this transmission. All ships full barrage. As you wish, Rostova said, and cut the connection. Kalen now. Executing, Admiral. Kalen's hands flew across his console. The moment the Overlord's ships began to retarget a select group of the Looking Glass drones reconfigured. They focused all their reflective power into a single point, capturing the Valdani's initial targeting scans and amplifying them, creating a single massive, irresistible ghost signature. This new phantom was located thousands of kilometers away from both the Balance and the Convoy, in a completely empty sector of space. It was a perfect lure. The Valdani, enraged and eager to strike a decisive blow, redirected their entire barrage toward the new target. A storm of energy and matter converged on nothing, a spectacular display of wasted power. And in those precious moments of misdirection, the convoy slipped past the final picket line. They were through. The gravity of Viridian Prime now had them pulling them toward the safety of the planet's defense perimeter. The first part of this trap had been sprung and paid for. A reckoning was coming. The refugee ships, battered but intact, limped into high orbit around Viridian Prime. The planet's own defense grid, a network of orbital platforms and system monitors, extended its protective shield over them. Cheers and cries of relief echoed through the cramped corridors of the convoy. For the first time in days, the people on those ships could see a safe harbor below them. On the bridge of the Balance, the crew allowed themselves a moment of shared, silent triumph. They had done the impossible. They had broken a Valdani siege without firing a shot, without a single casualty. Convoy is secure within the Viridian shield perimeter. Kalen confirmed, a rare smile touching his lips. All 80,000 souls accounted for. The Looking Glass cloud is 70% expended, Admiral, a worthy cost. Rostova allowed herself a small, tight nod. A cost, but not a victory, Kalen. Not yet. Her gaze was fixed on the Valdani fleet, which was now regrouping, its collective fury, almost a physical presence on the sensors. The Overlord had been made a fool of, and his doctrine demanded retribution. The ultimatum clock on the public channels had vanished. In its place was a new message from the unassailable will broadcast system-wide. It was an image of Viridian Prime with a targeting reticle slowly closing in on the largest population center. The Overlord's message is simple. Solon stated, its light pulsing a deep, ominous red. He declares the convoy's rescue an act of war. His new ultimatum is directed at you, Admiral. Withdraw the Federation fleet from the Viridian system, or he will begin orbital bombardment of the planet in 1 hour. They mistook mercy for weakness. The weight of the new threat settled over the bridge. They had saved the refugees only to place the 1.2 million inhabitants of the planet on the executioner's block. The Overlord had shifted his leverage. This was no longer about submission. It was about punishment. He's doubling down on his doctrine, Rostova said softly. He cannot accept a loss, so he changes the game to one he thinks he cannot lose, a test of pure brutality. Admiral, Solon interjected, its voice laced with the cold logic of probability. A direct fleet engagement against his regrouped forces carries a 41.6% chance of catastrophic failure. The logical course of action is a strategic withdrawal. We have saved the convoy. The fleet's preservation must now be the priority. Rostova looked from the AI to the image of Viridian Prime on her screen. We don't abandon people to monsters, Solon. We change the equation. Her voice dropped, becoming quiet and tense, drawing the entire bridge crew into her orbit. For the last hour, he has been teaching us who he is. Now we will offer him a lesson of our own. She looked at her tactical officer. Kalen, what is the status of the anchor probes we deployed on our way in? Kalen's eyes widened in understanding. Deployed and dormant as ordered, Admiral. 88 probes seeded throughout the system's primary orbital plane. The Valdani logged them as inert navigational aids and ignored them. They are not inert, Rostova said. Bring them online. Slave their targeting systems to Solong, but do not activate their primary function yet. A quiet trap is the deadliest trap. On the streets of Viridia, the capital city of Viridian Prime, the planetary shields cast a shimmering aurora-like glow across the sky. A civic defense officer helped a family into a hardened subterranean shelter. The mother clutched her son's hand, her face pale with fear, as she looked up at the heavens. She could see the cold, distant stars of the Valdani ships, like malevolent eyes staring down at her world. The ground beneath her feet vibrated with the deep, resonant hum of the planetary shield generators, straining to hold back the coming storm. Hope felt like a very fragile thing. Rostova began to lay out her strategy. It was audacious. It was dangerous. And it was pure distilled human ingenuity. She would not meet the Valdani's brute force with more force. She would use their own strength, their own predictability, their own doctrine against them. We are going to make it look like we're running, she explained, her hands shaping the plan in the holographic tank at the center of the bridge. We'll feign a fleet-wide drive failure on the balance, making us the slow, tempting target. The rest of our ships will jump to emergency FTL, leaving us behind. He will not be able to resist, Kalen breathed, seeing the shape of the trap. A crippled flagship, the admiral he now despises. He'll want that kill for himself. Exactly, Rostova confirmed. He will see a fleeing, broken enemy. He'll see a chance to restore his honor and make an example of us. He will order his entire fleet to surge forward to rush down the corridor we create for them, eager for the kill. The corridor, Solon stated, its light shifting to a brilliant gold as it processed the immense tactical data which is lined with the anchor probes. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Rostova said, her voice a low promise. The Overlord is about to see his account come due. You cannot escape the mirror's gaze. The human fleet began to move. The two frigates, the Steadfast and the Agile, flared their engines and jumped, vanishing in flashes of cerulean light. It was a convincing performance of a panicked retreat. The Balance followed, but its engine output flickered, died, then sputtered back to life at a fraction of its power. It limped along, a wounded animal falling behind the herd. On the unassailable, Will, the Valdani tactical officer, shouted in triumph. Lord, they are fleeing. The main vessel is damaged. It cannot keep pace. The Overlord rose from his throne, a cruel smile spreading across his face. The humiliation of the convoy escape vanished, replaced by the hot thrill of the hunt. He had broken them. Their trickery had failed, and now their courage was gone. All ships! He roared, his voice booming across his fleet's comms. Forward full power, leave nothing of the human flagship, but scattered atoms. The Valdani fleet surged as one. 32 ships, from sleek destroyers to the monstrous dreadnought, accelerated into the chase. They streamed into the wide, empty corridor of space left by the fleeing Terran ships. Their engines burned hot, a torrent of power and arrogance. They were sharks smelling blood in the water. Rostova stood perfectly still on her bridge, watching the red icons of the Valdani fleet converge on her position. The proximity alerts began to chime, a rising chorus of impending doom. The deck beneath her feet began to vibrate from the strain on her ship's damaged-seeming engines. They have taken the bait, Admiral, Kalen reported, his voice steady despite the terrifying display on his screen. Entire fleet is within the anchor probe array. They're at maximum combat power. They think this is a chase, Rostova whispered. It's an invitation. She took a deep breath, the recycled air suddenly feeling crisp and cool. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen, at the faces of her crew composed and ready. They had placed their faith in her third option. She locked her gaze on the approaching storm. "Solon," she commanded, her voice ringing like a bell in the sudden silence of the bridge. "Open the ledger. Activate the lattice." Across millions of kilometers of space, 88 hidden probes came to life. They were not weapons. They were something far more elegant. Each probe was a hyper-advanced node capable of projecting a localized, programmable space-time lens. Together they formed a massive, invisible, system-scale reflection lattice. It was the looking glass principle, magnified 1,000 times. The space within the corridor shimmered. It was not the glow of a shield, but a subtle, almost imperceptible distortion, like heat haze on a summer road. Billions of microscopic gravitic mirrors were aligning, calibrated to picosecond perfection. They were designed not to block weapons, but to misdirect the very information that guided them. Aboard the Valdani ships, fire control officers gasped. Their screens, once showing a single lumbering target, were suddenly flooded with hundreds of perfect, unjammable targeting solutions. The enemy fleet was back, surrounding them, appearing from nowhere, everywhere, all at once. The signatures were perfect, the firing solutions undeniable. The Overlord, blinded by his rage and the seeming perfection of his tactical data, did not hesitate. Fire at will, annihilate them all. Their own strength became their prison. The Valdani fleet, at the peak of its charge, unleashed a hellstorm. Lances of brilliant energy, swarms of missiles, and volleys of kinetic slugs erupted from their hulls. But the weapons did not fly toward the distant, wounded balance. The lattice did its work. It did not return the fire to the sender. It simply nudged it. It bent the targeting data. A destroyer's primary cannon, aimed at a phantom frigate to its port, was fed targeting data that was off by a mere fraction of a degree. But at these velocities, that fraction meant its volley tore not into empty space, but into the unshielded engine block of the cruiser flying alongside it. The first explosion was a silent, brilliant flower of plasma blooming in the heart of the Valdani formation. Then another, and another. The bridge of the unassailable will descended into chaos. Officers were screaming contradictory reports. "We're taking fire from the iron grasp. They've hit our aft shields. The Vindicator just fired on us. All our targeting systems are showing confirmed enemy locks. But the visuals are of our own ships." The Overlord stared in horror as his perfect, disciplined fleet began to tear itself apart. His ships, following their doctrine of overwhelming force, were executing their fire control solutions with lethal precision. But the solutions were lies. The lattice was showing them reflections of themselves disguised as the enemy. It was a slaughterhouse of mirrors. He was the butcher, and his own fleet was the meat. On the bridge of the balance, there was no celebration. The crew watched in stunned, somber silence as the Valdani fleet consumed itself. The main view screen was a tapestry of silent explosions and crippled venting ships. No human weapon had been fired. No order to attack had been given. This was not a battle. It was a reckoning. Rostova stood before the screen, her expression unreadable. She had built the mirror. The Valdani had shattered themselves against it. The light from their self-inflicted wounds washed over her face, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts on the deck. The countdown clock was gone, replaced by a steadily climbing tally of Valdani losses, calculated and displayed with cold, impartial accuracy by Solon. The lesson was being taught, written in fire and steel. The Valdani fleet was a maelstrom of fratricidal fire. On the bridge of the unassailable will, the Overlord watched his invincible armada devour itself. Alarms shrieked a symphony of failure while his officers screamed reports that made no sense. His perfect weapon, his doctrine of absolute certainty, had turned on him. He could not process the failure. He could only see the cause, the human ship. The balance floating serenely in the distance, a silent witness to his unraveling. It was a profound, unbearable humiliation. "Targeting is compromised!" His tactical officer shrieked, ducking as a console exploded in a shower of sparks. "We're locked onto our own ships. The human fleet isn't there." "They are," the overlord roared, his voice cracking with desperation and fury. "She is there, that cursed admiral. She is doing this." He slammed his fist on his command throne, the metal groaning in protest. He saw the red icons of his fleet winking out one by one on the tactical display, each one a nail in the coffin of his legacy. The debt was being paid in their own coin. On the balance, the mood was grimly professional. There was no elation, only a heavy silence as they watched the inevitable result of a flawed philosophy. Solon's synthesized voice was the only sound, a calm recitation of the escalating damage reports. "Valdani destroyer Iron Grasp has lost primary power. Cruiser Vindicator is venting plasma from its core. 21 Valdani vessels are now combat ineffective. The lattice is holding." The AI's light was a steady, analytical blue. "Maintain the lattice," Rostova ordered, her voice low. "Let them see the full consequence of their choice." This was not about destruction. It was about demonstration. The Valdani had built their empire on the principle that overwhelming force was an unanswerable argument. She was providing the answer. Kalen monitored the energy bleed from the Valdani fleet. "They're still firing," he said, his voice a mix of awe and horror. "Their automated systems are still trying to engage the phantoms. They are literally too aggressive to stop themselves from dying. A doctrine of fear cannot survive the mirror." The overlord, seeing his fleet reduced to a field of drifting wreckage, felt a final venomous surge of defiance. If he was to be undone, he would not be undone alone. He would burn the cause of his failure from the heavens. He stabbed a finger at his own console, overriding the corrupted targeting systems with a direct manual command. He would aim the old way. He would aim with his eyes. His target was not the balance. It was the blue and white marble of Viridian Prime. "Bring the main cannon online," he bellowed at his terrified crew. "Manual sequence, target the planet's largest city. If I am to be erased, this system will be my funeral pyre." The massive spinal cannon of the unassailable. Will, a weapon capable of cracking continents, began to glow with a sickening incandescent energy. His surviving crew stared at him, their discipline finally breaking in the face of such a monstrous, nihilistic order. His pride demanded a final bloody act. Solon's light instantly flashed from blue to crimson. "Admiral, the Dreadnought is initiating a planetary bombardment sequence. They are bypassing their own compromised fire control. Time to impact 90 seconds. The calm ocean of the AI's voice was gone, replaced by the urgency of an incoming tide. The choice was made in a heartbeat. The lesson in reflection was over. Now came the lesson in consequence. Rostova's arc from restraint to righteous decisiveness completed itself in a single sharp command. "Solon, collapse the lattice. Kalen, give me a direct firing solution to the unassailable Will's primary weapon conduit. Not the bridge, not the reactor. I want that gun silenced, now." Her voice was like forged steel. "Admiral, that will expose our position to their remaining point defense cannons," Kalen warned, even as his fingers danced across the console to obey. "The time for teaching is over," Rostova said, her eyes locked on the growing light of the Valdani cannon. "This is the final entry in the ledger." The shimmering invisible lattice of the anchor probes dissolved. The phantom fleet vanished. For the first time, the Valdani sensors saw the truth, a single human carrier poised and ready. But it was too late for them to understand. The balance surged forward, its own weapon ports glowing. As it moved, a volley of automated fire from a nearby dying Valdani destroyer lashed out a final spasm of a dead snake. A ripple of impacts hammered against the balance's forward shields, causing them to flare violently. The deck shuddered, a deep groan of stressed metal that resonated through the bones of everyone on the bridge. Red emergency lighting flickered on as alarms blared. "Shields at 40%, Kalen yelled over the noise. "We've taken a hit on Deck 7. Minor hull breach force fields are holding. Medical team responding to a crewman with plasma burns." Victory always leaves a scar. Rostova barely flinched, her focus absolute. "Fire!" she commanded. A single brilliant lance of blue-white energy shot from the balance. It was not a weapon of overwhelming force, but of surgical precision. It struck the unassailable will at the exact point where the massive cannon drew its power from the ship's core. The resulting explosion was not large, but it was decisive. The dreadnought's continent killer choked, sputtered, and died, the incandescent light fading into a pathetic shower of sparks. The bridge of the unassailable will went dark save for the red glow of emergency power. The Overlord slumped in his throne, a defeated creature in a metal tomb. His fleet was gone. His weapon was broken. His ultimatum was ash. Silence descended upon the Viridian system, broken only by the quiet hiss of venting atmosphere from dozens of crippled ships. The battle, if it could be called that, was over. Rostova watched the scene of devastation, her face a mask of solemn duty. The cost had been high, but it had all been on the Valdani side of the ledger, paid for by their own hand. She had simply provided the accounting. "Open a channel to all surviving Valdani vessels," Rostova ordered, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "Broadcast on all frequencies." A moment later, her voice echoed across the wreckage field. "This is Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Federation. Power down your remaining systems. Do not attempt to restart your drives or your weapons. Prepare to be boarded by our assistance and containment teams. Your war is over." It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. The ledger is closed. On the planet below, the family in the subterranean shelter felt the deep hum of the planetary shields power down. The civic defense officer gave an all clear. Cautiously, they emerged into the daylight. The mother looked up at the sky. The malevolent stars of the Valdani ships were still there, but they were silent, dark, and still. The shimmering aurora of the shield was gone, not because it had failed, but because it was no longer needed. Her son squeezed her hand. "The light ships won," he whispered, his voice full of a child's simple, perfect faith. Aboard the balance. Solon's light returned to a calm, neutral white. "Admiral, the 2 frigates have returned. They are assisting with search and rescue operations. All surviving Valdani commanders are signaling their surrender." The AI paused, then added a new data packet to the main screen. It was a formal declaration broadcast on the same public channels that had once shown the ultimatum's clock. "By the authority of the Terran Federation and ratified inter-system accords," Solon's voice announced for all to hear, "the doctrine of ultimatum primacy, as practiced by the Valdani Ascendancy, is hereby declared a crime against galactic peace. A full public accounting of their actions and the consequences is now entered into the permanent galactic record. All Ascendancy assets are frozen pending reparations." It was not a victory speech. It was a precedent. It was a line drawn not in sand, but in the hard data of history. The balance is restored. Rostova allowed herself a slow exhale, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. The bridge was quiet now, The only sounds the low hum of the ship's systems and the distant chatter of the rescue operations. Kalen was coordinating medical aid for the Valdani crews, prioritizing the most heavily damaged ships. There was no hint of malice in his voice, only the focused efficiency of a professional saving lives. She walked to the main viewport, placing a hand on the cool transparasteel. Outside, the stars were cold and unforgiving, the same as they had always been. But something had changed here today. An idea had been tested against its opposite, and it had been found wanting. The mirror had been held up, and the monster had flinched. "Solon," she said softly, "your casualty projections for a direct assault were 34% for the convoy." "Correct, Admiral," the AI replied. "And our losses for this operation: one Federation crew member with moderate injuries now in stable condition, a 7% depletion of our looking glass drones, a 12-centimeter hull breach on Deck 7 already sealed. Our energy expenditure was significant, but recoverable." The AI's light pulsed gently. The outcome was by all metrics logically superior. However, the path taken was unconventional. It relied on the antagonist's psychological profile as much as their military capacity. "They have to choose to break themselves, Solon," Rostova murmured, watching a Terran shuttle approach a crippled Valdani cruiser, its docking lights flashing a message of aid, not conquest. "We just have to give them the opportunity. We have to be the better choice." "A choice that is not an ultimatum," Solon stated. It was not a question, but a new piece of data being slotted into its vast architecture of understanding. "The variable of honor, Admiral. I am updating my models." Oh. On the command deck, the primary holographic tank, which had shown a system on fire, now displayed the calm, orderly vectors of the rescue and salvage crews. The crimson alerts faded to a cool, operational blue. The lattice arrays, their silent, reality-bending work, now done cooled from their high-energy state back to the dull pewter of inert matter. They thought strength was a hammer that could only fall one way. They believed a threat screamed loud enough became the only truth. But a line drawn in the stars is not a cage if you choose not to cross it. It is a definition. We did not break their will. We simply showed them its reflection and let them reckon with the cost to themselves. A lesson once learned is forever.